Welcome back. You're watching Global Eye. It's been a busy week for India with a series of bilateral meetings. Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, who watched the India-Australia Test match with Prime Minister Modi on Thursday, held delegation-level talks today. The discussion focused on economy, trade, defence, security, energy, education, mobility, as well as regional and multilateral issues. Prime Minister Modi raised the issue of attacks on temples in Australia. The Australian Prime Minister assured the government of safety and security of temples in his country. And moving on, 2022 witnessed an increase in global malware threat and cyber espionage. This, according to a report published by Crowdstrike. The report highlighted that China has dominated the cyber espionage landscape and was rated as one of the most active intrusion groups. The report also highlighted that Chinese adversaries are targeting nearly 39 global industry sectors across 20 geographic regions that Crowdstrike tracks. I caught up with Meyers, Senior Vice President at Crowdstrike, and began by asking him about the cyber espionage trends the organization has observed.
We've seen Chinese activity across every business vertical that we track and every geographic region that we track. They've been endemic across the globe in conducting cyber espionage operations. And one of the notable facets of how they operate is that we've seen an increase in exploitation. They've been finding new vulnerabilities in various products and exploiting them to get access to these organizations.
Adam, if I were to ask you to quantify the extent to which the Chinese espionage has increased, could you give us a number of the kind of attacks or the number of attacks that you saw in 2022 over 2021?
I don't have a number explicitly for that, but what I would say is that we've seen them in more locations and more victims over the course of the last year, and notably so over the previous year.
Any key sectors that, and were these state actors or were these private entities targeting entities around the world? Could you also give us a sense of the kind of sectors that were targeted?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've seen them very heavily in telecom. We've seen them also very heavily in, all sectors, as I said, but it depends on region. So, for example, in Central Asia, a lot of government targeting. In Oceania, they were going after energy, academia, nuclear power, government, telecom, healthcare, manufacturing. In East Asia, pretty widespread of things, to adding things like real estate and aerospace there as well. In Southeast Asia, again, a widespread academia and energy and telecoms and healthcare, all very heavily targeted, as well as defense. So it's a global problem, and it affects every industry and, as I said, every geographic region.
Right. If I were to ask you about India specifically, what are the kind of espionage activities that were targeted towards India? How did the strikes increase in 2022? And were the bulk of cyber crimes in India traced back to China, for that matter?
Yeah, so I would say it's not necessarily a cybercrime issue when we're talking about China. This is espionage. They're stealing intellectual property in many cases, but they're also stealing things that will enable political, military, and diplomatic decision-making. And obviously, with the conflicts between China and India around the line of actual control and some of the increased tensions in that region, we have seen that espionage targeting political and military and defense industries is most prevalent in India. Right.
And all of these were... how would you describe these attacks? Mostly, this was for stealing information, or was it to destabilize websites, destabilize the financial system, or cybersecurity of certain sensitive government departments?
It's espionage. So they would be looking to understand troop movements. They would be looking to understand decision-making processes, understanding how and where they would need to push in order to get a specific reaction that they're looking for from the Indian government. Also, in the case of broader context of India, if there's industries or technology that they'd like to steal and replicate, also if they're competing for projects. So if there's high-speed rail or telecom or infrastructure projects that China is bidding on, they would use that to get a competitive advantage in that bidding process.
Right, that indeed is significant. If I were to also ask you about the vulnerabilities that companies and government departments need to plug, which are these vulnerabilities which have been repeatedly targeted by adversaries?
So we've seen a wide array of things. From a China perspective, to kind of pivot off of that, they have been very heavily targeting things like Microsoft Exchange, particularly on-prem. They have been very effective in targeting various remote access tools and trying to use that to gain their initial access. We've also seen across the world a lot of social engineering, where they are various threat actors are attempting to log in using stolen credentials, or they'll use phishing attacks to gather the credentials to then log in with. And one of the things that we note in our report is that there's been a 70% of the intrusions are what we call malware free, meaning they're not using malware that would be detected by an antivirus. This is a threat actor just logging in and then using what we call hands-on keyboard to live off the land. They're using the tools that are already present in that environment and staying undetected as a result of that. So the vulnerabilities impact a lot of different products, for sure, but we also have seen this increase in that hands-on keyboard kind of living off the land approach, where they're just using credentials that are either stolen or phished from the target.
Right. In how many cases in India do you think that these Chinese espionage activities were successful in stealing information and penetrating sensitive government departments?
They have had some degree of success. I can't necessarily assess exactly where they were successful or how successful, but the Chinese are extremely adept at doing these types of operations. They've been doing it for the better part of 2 decades. And in India, they will no doubt have some success by just a factor of how frequently they're coming and how the tactics that they're using. So, one of the things that we advise is that organizations really invest in security. You can't stick your head in the sand and hope it's not going to happen to you. If you're in a business vertical that is of interest to China, you're absolutely going to get targeted. If you are dealing with large amounts of money or cryptocurrency, then North Korea is another threat actor to be concerned about. And we also have observed ransomware and things like that spreading across the globe to traditionally they focused on a lot of English-speaking targets, but they're expanding that over the last year or so. And we're also seeing the growth of data extortion. In fact, 20% of the threat actors that do ransomware are no longer even using the ransomware. They're strictly logging in, stealing data, and then disclosing it on the internet if you don't pay their extortion demand. So there's been a massive uptick in that activity as well.
All right, so China's cyber espionage activities are only increasing, according to Crowdstrike, and India was also targeted several times, especially political and military establishments, for data on troop movements and other sensitive activities. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.